Fantastic. Well, first off, thank you everyone for showing up. My name is Jadwiga Radomyskova, and I am the founder and the head of the Thornwood Scriptorum. And I'm out of a small shire located in Bellingham, Washington, in the United States. And my absolute passion within the society is scribal work, specifically using medieval pigments. And from there, I got into making them and then teaching people how to use them, because it's an easy way for us to get a little bit more historically accurate in the scribal work we do. And I've found that a lot of people tend to be pretty intimidated by the idea of period pigments. So I like to kind of show that it's not too scary, and it's also really interesting and really neat. Tonight, we're going to be going over a handful of things. I'm going to be showing you some of the different ways to make pigments. I'm going to show you some of the different types of binders, so ways to create paint using different materials, and then how they're all different, as well as discussing how other objects were made into paint, like gold. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how to identify rocks that make good paint. I will let you know that there's a lot of information out here, and I'm almost every day still learning more. So if you are an absolute expert at this and I've missed something or I've said something wrong, my apologies. Still learning, always a process there, but this is where my research has led me. This is where I'm at right now in my journey of discovery. So throughout this, I'll be pausing if people have questions. Go ahead, type them in the chat, or during those times, if you want to unmute yourself to talk. I will do my best to answer questions. At the very end, we can kind of have an open discussion if anybody's got any questions or comments that they want to say then. So yeah, so hi everybody. And again, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for coming here and seeing this. It just feels great to see that interest from people. To get started with, I'm just going to talk about period pigments and paints. And what you have overall is the combination of a pigment, something with color, and a binder, so something that will make it stick to the wood that you're painting, the vellum that you're painting, the paper. So it's a fairly easy process. It is pigment plus binder, add water, and then paint. So where we're going to start is actually one of the original paints that got used is tempera. And tempera involves your pigment plus egg yolks. So what would be done here is that an egg would be separated, whites from yolks, and then the sack of the yolk is pricked and put into a container, and this is mixed with pigment and then painted on there. The next thing that can happen as far as both in usage and time period, this was kind of some of the earliest painting was done this. Many frescoes and paintings on boards and walls were done with this style of paint. As we move forward in the time periods that the SCA is in, what becomes next popular is glare. And glare is where you take the whites of the egg and you beat them until they get kind of fluffy. You're not necessarily getting to like a meringue sort of thing, but you get them till they're like foamy, and then you strain them through cloth. And at which point in time you can whisk them again, or just start using them like this. And this becomes your second binder, which is called glare. Your third binder, and a binder that we actually use all the way up into the modern era, is gum arabic. So gum arabic is the sap from the acacia tree that is then, it can be ground up or just dissolved straight into water. So I actually have an example of this as it was, I was making this a little bit earlier, so you can see it's kind of got a little bit of gunkies in there, because this is literally just sap that is harvested off of trees. Once mixed with water, this becomes a very viscous, sticky liquid, which really helps your paint adhere. Most people modernly, and here in the SCA, recognize gum arabic as a fine white powder. And this is the form I tend to use when I'm using gum arabic, just because it's a little bit easier to work with, it's easier to mix, and easier to clean up. So we're going to be talking about this tonight and how all of these work. But the first thing you have to have a paint is a pigment. So we kind of have three categories of pigments. We have the earth pigments. So this is rocks. This is rocks that become paint. You have the plant-based pigments. So these are just what it sounds like. They're pigments made from plants. And then you have what I call the alchemical pigments. And those are pigments that are made through processes. So a great example of that would be the various lead colors that are used in medieval paintings. These are done by taking lead and heating it up and processing it, or things like sap green, which are taken by or iris green is another great example, where you're taking the liquid from pressed flowers, and by mixing it with other chemicals and other elements, you then create the paint. So we've actually got three different types of paint. As requested, a big focus tonight, we're going to be talking about the rock-based pigments, which are really awesome because rock-based pigments are something that anybody can find, anybody can make. And so that's actually where we're going to start right now. And we're going to actually make some paint from some rocks that I found. So what I like to do is when I'm looking to make a pigment out of found rocks, the very first thing that I do is there are lots of different kinds of rocks that can make pigments. The easiest ones tend to be kind of the clay-based ones, and they're the ones that pass what I call the spit test. But since we have guests from all over the known world, we're not going to do the actual spit test tonight, but I will show you a version of it, which is if you have a rock that you think might make a good pigment, the first thing you can do is just scratch it on something. And if it starts to leave marks, like you could write your name with it, that's a good sign. Another thing that I like to do is just get my hand wet, and usually like a water bottle or last ditch effort, lick my hand, and then mix some of that rock in there. And I'm not sure if you can see it, but here we go. But once I added some water to it, this rock starts to leave pigment. So that's a good sign that this is a rock that can be used to make pigments. Now, going the far other route of it are rocks like hematite. I'm sure most of you are familiar with hematite. Hematite can actually be ground and turned into a pigment. And I've got it here on my other screen, and turns into an absolutely beautiful red pigment from all the iron in it. And going even further on this process, you have something like lapis lazuli, which can be turned into a pigment. But the process to turn this into a pigment is very, very elaborate, involving grinding this, adding various chemicals to it, and wax, kneading it all together to turn it into kind of a putty that will pull out all the impurities. The blue color alone will soak into the water, and then as you drain the water off and dry it, what's left is actually this pigment. So it's not always just as simple as grinding a rock, because if we were to take lapis lazuli and just grind it, we would get an awful gray grit that's not really going to make paint. So when you're starting out, I highly recommend looking for rocks that will make at least a little bit of color when you wet them down. If you want to turn rocks into pigments, you're going to need some supplies. So I highly recommend a good mortar and pestle. They don't have to be very expensive. They don't have to be stone. This one's a ceramic one and works just fine for what I'm doing. I recommend getting a palette knife. I like using a good metal palette knife just because you need to add some pressure. A muller. A muller is a piece of glass with a flat bottom, and this is used in conjunction with another piece of glass or plastic to really grind your pigments and make them super, super smooth. Because for the most part, now everything I say is going to have some exceptions, most pigments you want to have be very, very finely ground. And then it depends on what kind of binder you want to use. And so the pigment we're making today was found up at Artist Point on Mount Baker here in Whatcom County. And once I grind this down, we're actually going to use the various binders and show you kind of how they look differently. So one of your first steps is going to be to grind your pigment up. And that's kind of, depending on the rock. Now, this one being more of a clay base is nice because it's actually going to break apart pretty easily. Some rocks are going to take a hammer. They're going to take a little more work. So you can see here, I've kind of broken up a few pieces of it. And then the next step we're going to have is to just grind this down to a fine powder. And I apologize because it's not a very nice sound. So feel free to mute it for a moment while I grind this. I'll give you a thumbs up once I'm done. And we can, like, when you edit it, just put some like fun, like boom, boom, boom music over it so that no one has to hear the sounds of grinding pigment. But yeah, so what you're looking for when you do this is just to have it ground as finely as you can, and so sometimes that's going to take really like getting in there, because you do want to powder. When we think about paint, we don't think about gritty, right? We think about smooth paint. And scribes who've worked with period pigments or even low quality pigments know how awful it is when you get a paint that is gritty or has larger pieces in it. So, all right. So here we go. We started to get this down, and as you can see here, I'll get it in, starting to kind of powderize a little bit. We've still got some big chunks, but that's a good start. So that's another good sign of something that could be a good pigment is if it starts to grind down, especially on these clay-based ones. Okay, so from here, the next step depends on how quickly you're going to go. If I was sitting here and not trying to like bore you all to tears, I'd probably grind this for a lot longer and possibly even sift it out. But given the limited amount of time we have, I'm not going to do that. So what we're going to do at this point is taking just a little scoop of it here. There we go. We're going to put it onto a piece of glass or plastic, and get these guys out of the way here. Using your muller, you're going to grind it even further down. Now, the nice thing about the muller is that it, being a flat surface, really helps you feel if something's being gritty, or if you've got a larger chunk that you've missed, because you will absolutely feel it not stick down there. And the other thing, this is another good sign. You can see we're starting to get that powderized version of the stone because it's actually sticking to the bottom of the muller. All right. So at this, oh goodness, Screechy's here. Okay, so at this point in time, what I'm going to do is add a little bit of water. Now, a note on water. You want to use as clarified, pure water as possible. Modern water, especially out of a tap these days, has lots of additives, both for our health and to make it taste better. So we're talking minerals and stuff like that. Well, that can actually interact with some pigments and actually change their colors or cause them to eat through certain papers and whatnot. So your best bet is to use purified water. And if you don't want to go by like a jug of it, just setting your water out overnight or for a couple days helps immensely. So our next step is going to be to take some of this water and just add a couple drops of it here. using my palette knife, we're going to kind of mix it all in together till we get a nice little bit of goo. And really, as always, the consistency we're looking for at this stage of painting or of creation is toothpaste. You want something about as thick as toothpaste. Now, you would never want to paint with it, but if it becomes too thin, it's very hard to work with to try to make it into paint. And it's also easier to add more water if it's too thick than it is to add other stuff, right? Unless you've got lots of powdered this, that, and the other. So once we've got it down to this consistency, once again, we're going to grind it. And now you're going to feel this kind of smooth abrasion there, and that's a great sign. So that means that this is probably one of the nicest rocks I've ever used for making pigments, and actually is like my favorite one for when I teach the class in person and actually have people make it, because, well, it's very rewarding. Okay, so at this point in time, we have our pigment base. So this, despite kind of looking like paint, isn't yet paint. This is just pigment. Now you could paint with this, but if you were to try to paint with this, it would eventually fall off your paper or your vellum. It would probably stain it a little bit, but you're not going to get a nice color in the end. Okay, so now we decide what kind of paint we want to make. So I'm going to divide this up into 3 little bits, and now we're going to make paint. Okay, so paint number 1, tempera, which, by the way, is tempera, not tempura, very tasty food. I've definitely taught an entire class talking about tempera paint, and one of the lovely Laurels that was sitting in didn't tell me that until the very end, and it was very embarrassing. So tempera, not tempura. Okay, so this is made by mixing your, yes, and also, thank you. Ravenquara says also not the same as the cheap tempera paint that you get at the average art and craft store. Thank you. That's a great thing to point out, and I'm adding that from here on out. Absolutely, that this is a completely different type of paint. Okay, so we've got our paint base, and what we're going to do here is we're actually going to add some egg yolk. So I tend to start at about just under 50-50, so just a little less than 50-50 in favor of the pigment. And is there a name for the glass paint? Sorry, is there a name, any, not to the, I have seen them called mulling plates, because this is your, oh, here we go. Got 2 screens here. This is your molar. I've seen them called mulling plates, but generally speaking, when we look at like Cennini or somebody, he, one of the like period writers, they just refer to like a glass plate. Sometimes there's a smooth stone that people use. But to the best of my knowledge, I don't think there's actually a term for it. Mine literally is just a piece of clear acrylic that I had that I've used because my glass one broke. All right, and I'm going to get to these questions as soon as I mix this up. So keep asking your questions and I will answer them all in just a moment. Okay, so what we're going to do at this point is we are mixing the egg yolk to the pigment base. And we're getting a kind of nice consistency here. Now, if you feel that it's maybe a little thick, you can add a little bit of water. So what I like to do sometimes is I have a little bit of water on the side and kind of pull it in. So you get it to a consistency that's paint-like. Now, here's the deal with tempera, is that you have to use it now. Due to the nature of it, it won't last, and it's not like modern gouache, which most of us use when we're not doing period pigments in SCA painting. Gouache will reconstitute and let you use it again, and actually some of the later ones we use will allow you to. But this one won't. This one you actually have to work with fresh, effectively. The other thing that you can do, if you're feeling that this paint is not quite at the consistency you want, or you start to paint it with it and it's getting a little thin, one of the things you can do, an add-all for pretty much all of these paints, which I highly recommend, and especially with the tempera, is honey. Adding just a drop, like think like a drip drop amount of honey added to your paint, does a couple things. It's antiseptic, so it's actually going to keep bacteria from growing and your paint from smelling bad down the road. It's also going to add a little extra gloss to it, and it is one of the things that just makes these paints phenomenal. Now, once you've got everything mixed in, you've got paint. It's really just that simple. Get my brushes here. Oh, hey, that one had paint on it already. There we go. So now we have a nice, beautiful brown paint. Huzzah, we made paint. Now, the advantages to the tempera paints are that the colors are very rich. Now, they're kind of washed out in this video because the lighting I have in here, but tempera paints tend to be very glossy, very rich and beautiful, bold colors. Now, the disadvantage to these paints is they're a little bit brittle. It's one of the reasons why they're mostly painted on wood and panel, because they don't hold up on books as well. They will crack and flake. So it is an advantage, disadvantage sort of thing. Now, most of the painting that we do here in the society is on flat single page scrolls. So that's okay. Yeah, so that's that. All right, T for tempera. Okay, so a couple questions came up while I was making this. Question number one was, where can you get a Muller and how much do they cost? If you look up medieval painting supplies, groups like Natural Pigments and the Limners Guild have these, and usually a Muller is going to run you about $20. Alternatively, if you know people who do glasswork, they can make these for you as well. That's actually where I got mine. Was I asked a friend who does glass pieces and said, could you make me something like this? So that's usually going to run you about $20 to $30. The big guys are going to cost more. The little guys are going to cost less. Let's see. I have fermentation weights and hope to sand it smooth. Would that work for now? Give it a try. I'm not sure what a fermentation weight is, but I kind of have a little bit of a mental image. Give it a try. You never know. Some of the things that I've used in the past for a Muller was a strong piece of agate that had a flat side, and I used that until I got a glass Muller. So there's not really a right or a wrong way to do it. As long, there you go. Hey, yes, that flat, great. I suddenly realized on my other screen there's people, and they're like showing me stuff. So yes, I think as long as you've got a flat side, you're good. You're good.
Yeah, it's a little bit bubbly, but somebody told me if I could get somebody to just sand it down a bit.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Because up in Canada, I can't find one under $80.
Oh no.
Oh yeah.
Well, that's awful.
These were 10 for 4.
Yeah. No, if it's glass and flat, you can make it work. I know somebody who had a coaster and they were using a glass coaster. So, like I said, there's not really a wrong way. If you can make it work, it works. The important part is, are you using dirt and other stuff to make paint? Awesome. Okay, and oh goodness, if I try to pronounce your name, I'm going to completely murder it, but I am being shown that Amazon has glass molar for making paint in 1.9 and 2.4 varieties. So apparently our hobby is getting interesting enough that check out Amazon. Looks like they might have some. On to our next pigment creation, which is using glare. Now, glare is awesome because it's made with the egg yolks, and it's kind of egg whites, and it's kind of a 50-50 between the tempera and the, let's get over here, the gum arabic. So this is still going to be a little bit glossier than the gum arabic, and it's also going to be have a little bit more flexibility than the tempera, but it's still a little brittle. It's still something I would, if you were recreating a manuscript page, I would, or a book, I would probably, until you get really comfortable with it, probably stick with the gum arabic. But this is fun stuff to use. It will actually keep. And in fact, as it ages, two things happen. A, it smells really bad, but B, the worse it smells, the better it works. So I tend to keep mine capped and in the fridge until the smell gets to the point where I'm like, nope, no. So yeah, so again, what we do is we take the egg whites and we whisk them until they get frothy, and then you strain them through fine cloth. Now, traditionally, this was done in a wooden bowl with a wooden whisk, and you would have your apprentices do this. Well, I'm not a peer, so I don't have apprentices, but I do have the newbies in my scriptorum. So for a living history experiment, I gave one of them a wooden bowl and a whisk and made them do that until I got frothy egg whites, which A, did work. B, I also got told they'd never do it again. So, wait till you find an apprentice to stick them with it. But if you don't want to use a wooden whisk, a metal whisk will work fine. Or in a pinch, if you've got a blender, you can blend until it gets foamy and frothy, and you can use it that way. I've done all of the above with great success. It kind of depends on how much of a hurry you're in. Okay, so it's a very similar process, and you're going to see that kind of across the board here, is that once you start making paint, you're making paint. You're taking your pigment, you're adding your binder, and you're mixing. Now, one of the things that I have really learned is with the tempera, you really want to add the honey. And same when we get to the gum arabic. It makes the color nicer, it helps it mix better, and it also keeps it from having any smells or getting weird later on, because we are, using raw ingredients. So just keep that in mind. And same thing as when we're talking about using the right kind of water. Same thing here. You want to use the right kind of honey. Don't go using grocery store honey from a bear that may or may not be just sugar. You really want to use real honey. It's very important there. So make sure you're using quality ingredients. I have done some experiments with eggs to figure out which kind of eggs make the best paint. And, as far as colors and ability to paint onto the page and whatnot, I have found that, like the free range chicken eggs from your local farmer's market, or Bob down the street whose rooster wakes you up at 5 o'clock every morning, that guy's chickens tend to be the best eggs. I've just found that the shine on the paint is a little bit better. They have less of a smell, for whatever reason. I don't know if it's just because the chickens are eating better or what, but as with most things in life, quality ingredients give you quality outcomes. Okay, so now you can see here, we have paint number 2. Now, this paint also has to be used now. It doesn't really rehydrate, reconstitute. So just something to keep in mind, that if you're doing this, work in small batches to create the amount of paint you need in a moment, and just do that. So here we go. So now one of the things that you're going to notice is that this paint, with the glare, now the glare I made today, so it's not as aged as well. So it is a little thinner. The particles are suspended in it a little bit more. I tend to, if I'm going to be doing glare, sit with my molar and integrate it a little bit more. I find glare to be very challenging to work with, and it's something that I'm working on experimenting with a little bit more because I have not had the success with glare that I'd like. But after a layer or two, it becomes an absolutely beautiful color, slightly less shiny, but more difficult to work with. So something to keep in mind. Okay, so we've done tempera and glare. Does anybody have any questions, comments, something they want to add, something I've missed while I take a drink here?
I was just going to mention, you can also add glare to just modern paints to give it more of that egg look. And the other thing I really like to use it for is with metallic powdered pigments, because it holds them a lot better than just water.
Oh yeah, yeah. And actually we'll be, that's great. I'm so glad you brought it up, because it was actually one of the things we'll talk about at the end, is how we can use period materials to make modern materials work a little bit better.
How does the glare last in the fridge?
I had, right up until a power outage took it out, I had a glare that was over a month old. So I just kept it cold and used it. And like I said, as it ages, good glare, it doesn't get it'll eventually go bad and you're like, woof, but it does start to get a little bit funky. And right when it just starts to turn a little funky and you start to notice there's some smell, that's when it's working great. But yeah, you can get it to last up to a month, maybe even longer.
Okay, mine's been in for like 7 months.
Yeah, hey, you know what? Give it a try.
Okay.
Because if you can open it up, like I would open it up outside just in case. We have a Laurel here who I actually learned a lot of my pigment stuff from, and I think hers was probably like 7 to 9 months old. It was definitely robust, but give it a try. What I would do is I'd open it outside first just in case, but as long as, like I said, if it's not too much of a smell, it's probably going to work really well. So glare, what I have learned with it, it's all in the details. Really get it nice and frothy, get it really well strained. Do that a couple times and you're going to get a way better material than my single strain that I did for tonight. This guy after this is going to get whipped up a couple more times. We're going to work on this. So if you know me, check in a couple months. Let's see where it's at. Okay, so there's some questions here.
What do you think about adding essential oil of lavender to it? It would help be antibiotic a little, and it would counteract the smell.
Possibly, yeah. Okay, I'm going to roll up here a little bit. Got a couple things. So yeah, hide glue as a binder. I think, yeah, what Raven here said is too brittle for paper. Also, yeah, I'm not sure about the mixing. I've never done it, never used it. Milk paint being a modern thing, again, that's another one that's not in what I've taught. And then Tamlin popped in here, and she's the person I was talking about with the absolutely horrible smelling glare that was beautiful to paint with, and also amazing for using with gilding. So Tamlin is an absolute genius when it comes to these things, and where I've learned a lot of my stuff. So anything I got wrong is because I probably misremembered it. Everything I got right, all credit to Tamlin here.
Raven's good too.
So,
Raven's my first teacher, or the one that I first saw gilding from.
all right.
But one of the things I didn't hear you talk about is levigation. And levigation would be where you would have put all the powder into water and shake it up and it'll suspend. And what they would do with that is they would let it suspend for a certain amount of time, and then they would pour off the water. Well, the water they were pouring off is the stuff that they would keep to make the pigment out of, because it was finer ground than the stuff that goes to the bottom.
Yeah.
And they would just keep on grinding until to get the finer pigments. It's how you get the finer pigments out from the coarser pigments.
Yeah, I've forgotten the actual term for it, but yeah, I talked about it a little bit with talking about using like lapis lazuli and whatnot. But yeah, absolutely. One of the ways what Tamlin there was saying is absolutely when you grind a pigment, and some of the rocks that I have, that's the best way to get it out there is you mix it in with a lot of water. And like Tamlin was saying, it's suspended, you pour it off, and as that dries, you get the really fine things. What's left behind, that's what you can keep grinding until you get everything. Or in the case of some of them, the stuff that doesn't grind as well, those are the things that you toss. Last pigment to look at. Now, one of the things you may have noticed is across the time while I've been talking, this is kind of dried up a little bit. And that's the cool thing, since it's literally just rock and water, we can reconstitute it. If I waited many days, I would probably have to regrind it. I actually have a great example of this here. Bring out a little, let's see my knife. Some Terra Vert that I have here, for example, is some Terra Vert. And this is literally just pigment and water that I mixed together a couple years ago. And it's a great way to store it. And then when I need it, I can grind it down, and that way it's not powdery, it's not getting all over everything. So that's kind of what we've got going on here. Is this is just rocks and water. Same thing. If it starts to dry up while you're working on it, you can always just kind of scrape it, smush it. You can add a little bit more water, just because all that's happened is the water's evaporated. When I'm mixing with gum arabic, you've got a couple options. You can either use the powdered gum arabic, or like I said, the resin, literally just mixed with water. I've just had this sitting all day. Now, the resin mixed with water, usually I do 1 part resin to 3 parts water. And then I'll be adding additional water to mix it. But the thing is, most resin that you're gonna get, you see these little dark blobs in here? That's actually just impurities. And there was like a twig in here earlier that I pulled out, and there's like a piece of hair, because these are literally just scraped off the tree and bagged up. So something to keep in mind, if you're going that route, it's totally okay, but be careful about the impurities, because you're usually just going to get it in a bag that looks like this. And it's not that they didn't care when they made the bag of it. It's that these impurities are literally, let's get it out of here. They're literally a part of the piece of resin. Let's see, that's where we're going to focus. So those impurities are actually inside the resin, right? It's tree sap, think Jurassic Park, right? It is something to be aware of, that if you're going this route, to take extra care that you don't then transfer those impurities into your paint. Yes, I just got asked, is purified water equal distilled water? Yes, I just, for the life of me, could not remember the word distilled and was too embarrassed to ask. So yes, distilled water. Thank you, Emma. Okay, so I love that you guys are asking questions. They just distract me. It's amazing. So when we're doing the gum arabic, I like to go 50-50 pigment to arabic. That's what I found to be very successful. I'm sorry, there's like the glare there's kind of hiding it. And just like we were talking about earlier, I didn't used to put the honey with the gum arabic, but now that I started doing it, I can't live without it. Like, it just makes it stick better. It smears less. It's just, everything about it's wonderful. So here you can kind of see it. I've got some honey. I've got some gum arabic. I've got my pigment. And then I'm going to add a drop of distilled water to help mix it all in. And when we do this, we're going to get a pigment. And for those of you who are scribes in the SCA, those of you who are artists in real life, this is a very similar paint to modern gouache. It's very similar to modern watercolor. The biggest difference between this and modern watercolor is that modern watercolor has chalk in it as well. But this is the paint you recognize and know. And this is one of the things that I love the best about doing period pigments is that, sorry, you're right, backwards, I'm right. No, gouache has a chalk, watercolor does not. So this is actually like watercolor. Thank you. It's been a long time since I've taught this class. So yeah, Your Excellency, edit that part out. Modern gouache has chalk. That extends it, makes it more to it. It also gives it that the opacity that we look for in gouache, the thing that makes it not transparent, that's the chalk. Whereas watercolors, you're going to get those glazes, those thinner colors. That's that's why that is. So this is effectively watercolor, in some ways. This is that paint that you're familiar with. This is the paint that you've probably used. And the really cool thing is, just like our modern watercolors and gouaches, this can be left out to dry and then reworked. And in fact, for myself, everybody's going to have a different experience with this, but I prefer to make my paints ahead of time and use them reconstituted. That way I can add the water and use it at the consistencies that I'm used to and I like. But there you go. That's the paint you know and love if you do these things. So if you're used to using gouache, the SCA, you're going to find out that this is a little thinner. It's going to have a little bit more of a glaze-like quality, but it layers beautifully and you can actually get nice, thick, gorgeous colors off of it. No problem. It is not quite as shiny as the tempera and the glare, but that addition of honey brings it out a little bit, and it's a beautiful, it's a beautiful paint. Here's the cool thing. From here, you can store it however you like. For displays, and actually just using, I go with what was used in the Middle Ages. I use shells. There are actually certain pigments that react to the calcium in the shells, and it helps change the color or make the colors brighter. And it doesn't hurt your basic colors. So you just take your paint, put it in your seashell. I made just a tiny amount for here, but there you go. Now you have it. So here is a Terra Vert that I made earlier in its shell. And you just pull it off just like a regular paint. It's that easy. If you are somebody who really likes using watercolor pans, you can put it into those, or you can even get the tubes, just like the paint that you would normally get, and put it into those tubes, which is really awesome because then you can have tubes, but you're using medieval paints. And it's a really cool thing. Yeah, so that's my little section on the paints. Does anybody have any questions, comments, thoughts? Tell me where I'm wrong. It's all good.
I was just going to mention, as far as a slab, another thing that works really nicely is marble. And a tip that I learned is that instead of spending, I don't know how much at a fancy cooking store on a marble board that like you would use for cooling candy, for instance, if you go to a tile and flooring store, they will have nice big squares of marble tile that do not cost as much.
Nope. And it's a great example. Yeah, it's a great suggestion. And just run your hand across it, right? And make sure it feels smooth and flat, because if you get those divots in there, this pigment, you saw how fine, and it's powder, really. It's gonna stick in there, and you're gonna be using one of my favorite tools that I feel, all scribes need, toothpicks. You're gonna be picking that pigment out, and nobody wants to do that. So yeah, marble slabs, great suggestion there.
I have a question.
Yeah.
This is Emma. Can you give me a timeline? I mean, I know that tempera and frescoes were like the Italian, Renaissance thing. But are they used in earlier cultures? Like, did the Minoans had wall frescoes? Were they using this technology? Did the Romans use it? Do you have an idea of a historically accurate timeline?
Yeah,
historically.
Yeah, there's so the tempera gets used all the way back onto the Greek and Roman frescoes. They found tempera being used. So,
Egyptian too.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. See, my knowledge cuts off at a certain point, but yeah, as I understand, the tempera is kind of the original. It gets used all the way back, and as we get more towards the Renaissance, that's when we start seeing the change over to the glare and then the gum Arabic.
Because you've got people like Da Vinci making experiments. The other thing is, most places these days have a restore or a restore is the Habitat for Humanity sort of come get the bits. So that's also another place to look for tiles, or maybe smooth glass door handles or smooth ceramic door handles that, clock in cheap.
Yeah, exactly. Look at those things. One of the things, if we're looking at where to buy supplies, gum Arabic, you can get it from art stores. You can get it from, specialty shops like that. You can also get a bag of like a pound of this used as a digestive aid on Amazon for about $16. And it works just fine. So that's another one of the options that you can do is to find the inexpensive gum Arabic. It's for cooking, candy making. So that it surprised me the first time we found some that route, and then we bought a pound of it, and I'm still using that 6 years later.
Cool.
So that's a great place to find those things. Lindy, did you have a question?
I do. So I'm a transplant from Calafia in Cayenne, and I studied under a Laurel there for a very long time. And so what I use for for transporting my period pigments is the little bead, the circle bead containers that stack, and then you can have all of your different variants and travel with you.
Yes. So this is probably similar to what you were talking about, I think. So
yes, that exactly.
These are
like my favorite one to do.
These are super useful. A couple of the other options that I've done are just little containers like this and then label them, or the ones that have the screw tops like this.
Yes.
So lots of different options for carrying them. Lots of different options for storage. These are great for if you're doing a period display. One of my favorites for use is just teeny tiny ceramic bowls that we saw a merchant was making them, and my scriptorum had them make 200 of them. So another fun little things like that. So
my other question is, I'm in Washington on the Olympic Peninsula, and I was wondering if you knew any places that were good to find rocks or to gather pigment.
Yeah, actually. So a lot of, I'm in Whatcom County, so I'm kind of just right across from you. So I found a lot of stuff in the foothills of Baker all the way up to Baker. Looking for any of the screes, anything where it's kind of opened up and you've seen some tumbled rocks. I love to go digging those places. And like I was saying earlier, if I'm just out there, I just take a rock, lick my hand, cool, yeah, it's gonna work. You try it, that's where this beautiful brown came from. Like I said, Artist Point up on Mount Baker. I have this phenomenal here, this color here, which I got a friend gave me from the Grand Canyon. Somewhere near on their way to the Grand Canyon, they stopped to rest their feet or get out and walk, and she found this here. So you know, it's a little bit of everywhere. It's kind of cool that way. So yeah, it's, you do get in the habit of scrutinizing embankments. I was going up the Fraser Valley to an event up in our principality, and we saw this bright yellow set of rocks through all of it. So we parked on the side of the highway and climbed up the side of the mountain to go get it. Unfortunately, that one did not make good color, but it was beautiful. We were hoping to get a nice ochre, but not that time. And that's the thing, is a lot of it's also just trial and error. You're never going to know until you start smushing stuff around and trying it.
So make sure you keep a finds notebook.
Keep a finds notebook. I highly recommend, you know, when I go on trips, I literally will take, I have just a bag of bags that I tape a piece of paper to. That way, if I find something, I've marked it, because there's nothing worse than finding something. A, now you can go find it again, and B, you can document it. Oh gosh, yes, Ellen, the red clay is amazing. I have a absolutely beautiful red pigment that I got from the clay at Gulf Wars that I found, which was weird until I told people what I was doing. So yeah, try it, you know, give it a try, see what you can get. I find the clay based ones being really yeah, exactly. Clay is the best mineral for pigments. The one we did tonight is clay. And I don't know how well you guys can see it here, just because the light's so bright here. But even here, you can kind of see this is a darker color than where the gum arabic was, right? You've got a much more muted, less shiny color versus that tempera. And so that's the thing. It's all these different little tweaks you do create very different paints. And it's that alchemy of color is phenomenal. Yeah, that's my kind of basic covering on rocks going into pigments. Like I said, there's different ways that plants are made into pigments. You get the alchemical ones where by mixing things, burning things, adding oxygen, losing oxygen, that you get different colors. But tonight we were focusing on the rocks into paint. So please let me know if you have any questions. And if you're interested in this, please feel free to reach out to me. I usually teach this class in person, so I do have pre-made kits that are available to people that have 6 pigments. They come with your gum arabic and stuff like that, because for me, it's just the best thing would be to see more and more people paint with period pigments and not be afraid of them. So feel free to reach out to me after this class. I'm more than happy to hook you up.
I have a question.
I will do my best to answer it.
I was given about 14 different powders, pigments.
Ooh.
And oh, yes, I've got them coming up here. Hang on, I got to see if I can find myself so I know what I'm putting up. There I am.
Okay.
So
yes.
I've got like all of these yellows and things like that. And then I went to a garage sale and I got a humongous thing of ochre Havana for $3.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Nice.
So, and I've got some gum arabic.
Okay.
My question is, I want to paint my not period looking handmade box in a Renaissance painting. And should I use gum arabic or should I use egg tempera? Just about fit. Well, it would probably have been 1460 that it would have been made.
You know, that's a great question. And I would have to, I would have to do some research on that one. I would start looking at, because like my first thought on a wooden box like that would be to go with the tempera.
That's what I would say.
And that's what I'm leaning towards. And I was going to actually like shoot that over to Tamlin because she probably has a better idea than I do. But yeah, I would say I'd go with the tempera and then just give it a real, make sure it is really dry and then give it a really good clear coat when you're done. And I think you're going to have an amazing piece of work.
Yeah, definitely. I would definitely agree about the tempera. There was a local artisan in my area who did a bunch of Italian style tempera boxes, and they came out really nicely. And if you don't want to use like a modern clear coat, one thing that was often done as a final finish was beeswax, and you can buff that to this really nice satiny finish that still just
and I have lots of beeswax.
Yeah, it just depends on whether you want to, whether if it's something you're going to take to a tourney, then you probably want a modern varnish on it.
Oh,
but if just in terms of durability, but yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. And watching this tonight has given me the inspiration to kind of like start trying it. So.
Yeah, and that's the thing is what I I hope people come away from that is that, just feel free to experiment. I'm going to sidetrack Raven. Thank you so much for your input. I appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us tonight. But yeah, I hope you come away with this feeling confident to just try, get some paper, get a piece of wood, and then just start mixing stuff, trying it, because in the end, it is just dirt and water and an egg or a bit of tree sap, so it's not going to hurt you. It's not scary, and yes, there are things like lead paint and whatnot that you can get into when you're doing period pigments, and those just take a little extra care. Make sure you wash your hands, make sure that you've got, good ventilation without breezes, right? Because that's a bad thing. And a great thing that I do is for my pigments, when I've got paints that are lead based, I use paintbrushes that I have yellow on the tip. And these are the ones that I know are my lead based paintbrushes. So I have a completely different mug of water that I use, and then I dispose of that one properly. I don't want to say common sense, because if you're not used to it, it's not necessarily common sense, but the steps that you need to take to make these things safe, even if you want to deal with the more quote unquote scary paints, aren't too bad. And also, you don't have to do them. There's great reds that are not lead based. There's wonderful whites that are not lead based. You're not under any pressure that you must use the toxic paints, right? So keep that in mind when you just have some fun experimenting and playing with it. We had a question that was asked if does a light fastness concern figure into doing this and using on scrolls? Raven answered exactly what I was going to say, is that, yeah, earth pigments, these are very light fast. They're rocks. They've been out in the light. What you see is kind of what you're going to get. We're not going to have a lot of chemical processes or light changing them. And that's one of the other really cool things about that. Yeah, as far as having separate brushes for waters and metals, whites, and everything else, it's up to you. I personally, because I like being able to dump some water down the drain and then I have a bucket for the other water, I do keep them separate. You don't have to. I just choose to, just out of an abundance of caution. Go ahead.
You were talking about the green that was in this shell just a little bit. What exactly did you use on that?
That is a rock called Terra Vert, literally green earth. It is a green rock found. This one is an Italian one, so it's just literally a green rock found in Italy. Most green's a really tough color. If you're not using malachite, which makes a very, I've got some right here. So malachite tends to make a very almost kind of mint-ish green. And then you can use copper to create copper sulfide, and that tends to be a more blue colored. But to get an actual green, it's really just a green rock called the green rock. And one thing that you will notice is that we do not really have a dark hunter green in the period pigments without like doing a mix of something, because that's just not a color that's really found or made during our time and place.
Well, that's awesome. Thank
Yeah.
you. So
anything you can say more about mixes? Or is
yeah,
that
I can say-
is that like 102.
It's slightly beyond what we're doing tonight. However, if you look at things like Cennini's book and a few of the others, they do absolutely talk about how you do mixes to create flesh tones, to create some things like that. So mixes do happen. And it tends to be like take a white plus a yellow plus a little bit of a red to get a flesh tone. And it's not so much put yellow and blue to get a green.
So they're using layers.
Yeah.
Like they would later when the oils came in.
Exactly. Like one of the earliest things that you see is base, like when you're doing flesh tones and humans' faces and skin tones, it's always underlayered with green. And once you know that and start looking for it in paintings, it's hard to miss. But yeah, so layering tends to happen more than straight out mixing, but you do see some. The biggest thing you've got to look for is some paints do react badly to each other. Less on the earth pigments. Earth pigments, they're just, it's just dirt and water here. But when you start getting into some of the lead-based paints and stuff like that, sometimes you will occasionally have some that when they touch turn brown or interact badly with each other. So I always recommend, if you're working with them, just make a little test sheet like this, mix them up, wait a day, see what's going, just double check, or reach out to, your scribal laurels and ask them, because they usually have a good idea. If anybody wants to talk about stuff that's beyond the scope of this class, please feel free to find me on the Book of Faces under Jadwiga. I love to nerd about this all the time. And if there's enough interest, I'm more than happy to teach about the pigments that aren't just made of rocks, or specifically how to paint with period pigments, which is a little bit different than painting with, say, gouache or oils. So, but I really want to thank Their Excellencies Terra Pomaria for hosting me and having me, and all of you who've come out to watch and chat, and it's really awesome. And those of you who had the knowledge to share, thank you for filling in the gaps in my knowledge and making this like a whole roundabout class. This is awesome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are we muted? I can never tell.
No, we're not. Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, I love experimenting on everything. So
Yes.
this is going to be a very fun class to put into practice.
Absolutely. And like I said, anybody who wants to experiment with some period pigments, please reach out to me and I can get you some supplies so that you can start playing around with it. Yes, and always remember, don't drink the paint water.